Hi, this is my review of the Harker Asylum Virtual Box Set by 01 Games. This virtual box set contains battle maps but also battle tiles that you can use for many role-playing games and skirmish games. It features a theme of an abandoned asylum that houses many horrors within. Now, let's talk about the quality of this virtual box set. As expected of 01 Games, the quality is excellent. When you purchase this virtual box set, you get several booklets. 3 of those booklets feature complete battlegrounds, that is, maps of the different floors of the asylum. But you also have 3 other booklets that contain the tiles arranged separately, so you can print those tiles and arrange them in any way that you want. You also have another booklet that features all of the maps in a single place. And you also have a very handy booklet that is room templates. With this, you can build some interesting adventures. That is, you have the tiles on each page, but you also have space to make notes, room descriptions, write anything that you need concerning the enemies that they can find in each room, different items if they search around the room, or traps, any feature about that particular tile, representing a section of the asylum. Now, each one of these booklets contains a Rule the Dungeon button, which is a staple of 01 Games. This button allows you to modify different elements of the game maps and the tiles. So for example, maybe you don't want the text appearing on the tiles. This is probably the best because otherwise you will be given some clues as to what lies within a certain room or section. And also, if you're playing, for example, a war game or a skirmish game, you don't want the numbers to be showing on the map unless you want to use them as perhaps objective markers. But you can still turn this text on and off. If you don't like the furniture or the trees, you can turn it on and off as well. Maybe you want to draw your own furniture, your trees, any sort of element on the map. Or maybe you want to use 3D terrain and you don't want that 2D terrain showing on the map. But you could also use your 3D terrain over that, over those trees or the doors, tables. You could use them as guidelines for the layout of the battleground. And you can also remove the filling of the different walls, remove the floor in its entirety, because you can also eliminate the background and the fancy border of the different booklets if you want to save some money on ink. You can also leave this sort of like oyster color in the background, so because maybe your description of a particular asylum clashes with the floor on these battle maps and tiles, because maybe you want like a floor that is almost completely blue and black or completely white. That way you can choose the layout and color that better fits your description. So this is great. This is a really handy way of customizing and enhancing the value of the product, because when you purchase this virtual box set, you're not only purchasing a set of maps, you're also purchasing tiles that you can rearrange and put them on the table any way that you want. And you could have campaigns and campaigns featuring creepy abandoned buildings, and they will all feel different, especially because of the customization concerning the furniture, the color of the floor, etc. Now, first, I'm going to give you a general description of each of these floors or grounds. First, we have the area map. I think this area map is going to be quite handy if you want to play this with a war game or a skirmish game. You could have, for example, a force protecting the asylum from invasion. Maybe you have like a group of crazy scientists or inmates or patients. They could be protecting this creepy place from a band of adventurers or something, or explorers. But when it comes to the role-playing aspect of it, I think it features some really some alternative routes into the asylum, and I will get into that when we talk about the different areas separately. And then we have the ground floor. The ground floor presents a good introduction to this scary site. You don't want the players to experience all of it in the ground floor. You want to entice them and to lure them in, giving them small clues and presenting some subtle threats. And then we have the first floor. Here you can play some more interesting things, some clues, some key elements that will help the player characters unravel the mystery of the asylum. I like it quite a bit that, for example, when it comes to the first floor and the rooftop, you can look at the floor below because the floor above, or rather the ceiling of the floor below, is quite ruined. So it's a really nice detail. And then we have the dungeon, probably the most scary, and I would recommend that it would be the most lethal place, because there are many places here that could house some terrifying experiments, some mad scientist creations that could attack the player characters. Now let's talk about each of the different tiles separately. When looking at the general area of the asylum grounds, we can see some places that could be used as sort of like secret passageways or puzzles into the asylum, because, for example, the fountain and the date, it could serve as an entrance, perhaps directly into the dungeon, who knows? Maybe you actually need a key for that. Or maybe they are some sort of a threat as well. Maybe, what if there's something hiding within the fountain? And also, if the characters are somehow locked within the asylum, that is, maybe they go across the asylum gates and some invisible force field traps them inside. What if they start to run out of water? Will they risk drinking water from the fountain? And what about the days? Maybe it's cursed. So it presents some options to play around with the general site. You also have a cliff, and this place is great for ambushes, in my opinion. Or who knows, maybe there's a victim hiding within, and it could provide some vital information as to what is going on in the asylum. You also have a burial ground, and this place, of course, it's basically screaming for you to put some undead in there. Or maybe you want to play around with the minds of the player characters. Maybe you want, of all the places in the asylum, maybe this is actually one of the few places that doesn't have enemies, and you just want to place some clues. Maybe the characters will have to dig out some corpses to see what exactly is going on in this asylum, because they give you a bit of a backstory to Harker's Asylum. The basic story is that a somewhat famous character, which is John Harker, maybe it's Jonathan Harker from Dracula, he was once an adventurer that defeated an ancient evil, perhaps Dracula. So John Harker gave his son Abraham Harker this asylum, and Abraham Harker became very skilled at healing mental diseases. This asylum was a place of healing and hope, as he helped many people. But one day, a mysterious figure arrived in a black carriage. Some say that this figure was perhaps the devil himself. Others say that it was a mysterious and beautiful woman from beyond the sea. Whoever that was, it presents an important mystery, so important that Abraham Harker had to leave the asylum, and he left it to one of his most talented disciples, which is Igor Jenkins. But when Igor Jenkins took control of the asylum, things started to change for the worse. Screams could be heard during the night, and there were reports of corpses disappearing from the local graveyard, and even people disappeared, to the point that even a little girl disappeared. So the villagers would have no more of it, and they decided to storm the place. But as fate would have it, a violent storm happened, and a bolt of lightning hit the easternmost part of the asylum, and the asylum was burned, was almost completely destroyed, when a convenient heavy rain suddenly manifested itself, and the fire was kept from spreading further. But many parts of the asylum were burned, were ruined, and when the people explored the asylum, they found many grisly remains and butchered corpses. So this asylum has been abandoned since then, and this sets up a really nice tone, a very atmospheric excuse to have some adventures within the asylum. Maybe the player characters just want to see if there's anything of value left, or maybe they are trying to rescue someone who mysteriously disappeared even after the asylum was abandoned. Who knows? Moving on with the different rooms and sections of the asylum. In the ground floor we have the entrance and the staircases. And these places serve to lure the characters further in. Maybe you want to place some clues, maybe there is like a little trace of footprints or blood across these particular sections. And the characters could be tempted into going further in, or going down the stairs or up the stairs. It's going to be somewhat of a dilemma for them if they want to explore the first floor first, or if they want to go into the dungeon. And then we have the archives. All of the different sections concerning the storage of documents are a great place to perhaps hide some journals or some notes, giving the characters a bit of the backstory and telling them more details. Perhaps Igor never died during the fire. Maybe he went into hiding in some place in this asylum. We also have the storage areas. These places have a lot of boxes and crates. Maybe the characters could find some dry rations, some grain, but would they risk taking some of those things from these crates? And what if there is something lurking within the crates? Some nasty vermin or something even worse? You also have the chapel. Maybe it was once a source of hope and prayer, but now it could hide some curses or hauntings within. We also have the operating room. Maybe you want to place like a sort of mummified corpse upon the table. Maybe some experiments were carried out upon this corpse, strange liquids injected into it, and it was preserved somehow, and it's now ready to rise up and attack the player characters. You also have the laundry room. Maybe you can put some nasty things inside this water deposit, or maybe hide some clues or items as well. You have the red dressing room, a perfect place for an ambush. I also forgot to mention that you can turn a grid on and off. It's not as necessary because, as you can see, the floor has squares, so it's going to be quite easy to tell the location and the area of effect attacks and such. But if you want a more clear view of the grid, you can turn it on, so that it becomes thicker. And then we have the infirmary, and here the characters could use it perhaps as a base camp of sorts. Although I think there could be better places, because it has so many entrances, it would be somewhat difficult to protect or defend. Maybe you just want to use this place of the infirmary to have some dangerous encounters. Maybe there are some things lurking on different beds, on corners of the room. Who knows? You also have bedrooms, and they could give a bit of a glimpse or insight as to what kind of things the patients experience within this asylum. Maybe you can perceive some of their desperation as they were trapped and at the mercy of Igor. You also have the reception. And the reception seems like a very important place. I think it will be quite creepy if, for example, some of these files or books start to open by themselves, as if there were some ghosts or vengeful spirits flipping through the pages of different documents, or maybe a pen mysteriously starts to move by itself. I remember it from a video game, and starts writing some things on the journal on its own. It would be quite creepy. You also have the waiting area, and this is a room that could serve as a better place or better option for a camp, in my opinion, because it's easy to defend, only two entrances. You even have like a view to the outside. So definitely one place you want to consider if you are somehow forced to stay inside this asylum. Maybe the characters made their way into the building and they got attacked from outside by a horde of zombies, or maybe mutated inmates or patients, and they have to lock themselves inside the asylum, which feels more like a prison rather than a place of healing. And you also have the kitchen. The kitchen is also very interesting. It has that hole from the storm of some years ago. Maybe you can use this hole to get into the dungeon from in an alternative way, or taking it as an alternate route, so that you avoid detection from any horrors that lie waiting in the dungeon. And then you have the refectory. I'm tempted to put some traps or monsters underneath these tables and pieces of ruined furniture, but you could also hide some potions and elixirs. Maybe some of these flasks still have some liquid within them, and you could play around with that. Maybe some of them are actually potions of healing, but some others actually cause disease. So you have many rooms in this ground floor that you can use, and you can customize them, removing the furniture, doors, etc. It's really important because it really gives you a different feel of the area when you remove certain things. Now let's take a look at the first floor rooms. Here you should present a bit more danger and more vital clues, because the first floor, being above the ground floor, it feels like it would be a good place, for example, when Igor was running things, to store and keep patients in a more secure area, so that visitors and guests wouldn't immediately notice that there was something really bad going on with this asylum. So you have different waiting rooms, and you have the guardian chamber. I think this is a good place to hide some clues, and perhaps even have the spirit of one of the asylum staff hunting this area. Maybe that spirit will provide some clues, or maybe it will attack the player characters or try to possess them. You also have archives that are somewhat similar in their practical use when it comes to the ground floor, sorry. You also have the drugs storage room, another excellent place to put some items, some type of liquid that the player characters can risk drinking it or putting it on their skin. If you have a character that is skilled at identifying such chemical and alchemical mixtures, this is his time to shine and perhaps gain some use from these different mysterious substances. And you have the ruined room, a good place to serve perhaps as a shortcut or alternate route between different floors. And then you have the terrace. This place could serve as a good vantage point. It could also serve as a place to set up camp and while having a view of the asylum grounds, but I'm somewhat suspicious of these statues over here. Maybe they will come alive during the night. You have different cells. I think this could have been used to house the most dangerous patients in the asylum. Maybe not necessarily evil. Maybe they captured some capable adventurers in the past and they kept them here until they were taken into the dungeon below. So these cells really express that this place is more of like a terrifying prison rather than a hospital to cure the mind. And then you have the toilets. Maybe you want to hide something in the toilets. Maybe you want the party could convince the halfling or the gnome to go down the toilet and recover something, but I hope they will give them some more gold for his or her troubles. And then we have the operating room. And in this place, I think this is also a useful section to place an ominous looking corpse. Are you ready to strike? Maybe it doesn't have to be like an animated corpse. Maybe there's a body that contains some terrifying disease or some parasite within, and when the player characters start to tinker around with the corpse, something jumps out like a chest burster and attacks the player characters. You also have a balcony, another good place, easy to defend, good to set up camp perhaps. And you have a meeting room that could offer insight as to the whereabouts of Abraham Harker, or what Igor was planning to do with this asylum. Now let's take a look at the dungeon. The dungeon really looks like a place to house the most terrifying, boss-like type of creatures. You want to place the most lethal, the most violent, perhaps experiments, or some patients that somehow survive through magical or profane means. So you have the guard post. This is a really nice place because it gives access to different areas of the dungeon, but at the same time you kind of get the feeling that there is something here, perhaps a puzzle or secret that could activate things in other rooms. You have the oubliette, a good place to store a terrifying aberration, or perhaps some creature resulting from an experiment that drove a man insane, and now it is prowling this area desperate for fresh meat. You also have a torture chamber. Maybe you can play around with the minds of the player characters. You can place some hauntings or evil spirits, or tortured spirits rather, that they assault the minds of the player characters by communicating the pain that they experienced in this torture chamber. You also have the padded cell. This is typical of insane asylums. And maybe you could hide some things within the different cushions and paneling on the floor, the walls, or even the ceiling, who knows. This place looks really good to hide some things. And then you have the cells. There could be clues hidden under the plates and the beds of the prisoners here. Or there could be some dangerous prisoners that somehow are still alive and have fed upon rats and perhaps other... Maybe you have like an entire ecosystem here of madness. You could play around with different creatures, placing them in these different cells. And you also have the fountain, another place that looks quite suspicious. Maybe this fountain connects to the fountain outside. Maybe it's possible to swim to get inside this fountain and swim through a tunnel, but maybe there's also like an aquatic beast of sorts lurking within, or perhaps some sort of like a tainted water elemental. And then you have the well, similar to the fountain in its use, or maybe the waters hold some special property. If it's actually, maybe it resulted in some sort of dangerous poisoned water, maybe the player characters, particularly assassins, could take some of this water and use them on their weapons in some other future adventures. You also have a ruined doghouse. I don't think we want to know exactly what type of dog would be in this area. Maybe it was no dog at all. Maybe it's some like a dire beast or an outsider creature of sorts. You also have the dog cage, and maybe it's useful, for example, if you want to keep someone trapped. Let's say that a player character was somehow possessed or controlled somehow, and he's now a danger for his comrades and for himself. Maybe they can keep him locked in here until they find a cure to turn that character back into his normal state. You also have the machinery room. This seems like a good place to hide some things in these different pipes and compartments or niches, but you could also, maybe they can trigger a sort of like a self-destruct mechanism, play around with different pipes and the pressure of the place, and destroy the entire building if it is needed. You also have a storage of coffins. As you may remember, Igor was stealing corpses and experimenting with those bodies. Maybe the coffins still hold some corpses within, and who knows, maybe some of those corpses are waiting to be disturbed, to pounce upon the player characters. You also have the toilets down here, similar to the toilets above. Maybe you want to hide something in them. Or maybe when you gotta go no matter the place where you are. And then you have the laboratory. Here I also think it's a good place to hide some terrifying enemies. Or maybe you could find Igor here still working on his ghastly research. You also have the experiments room. This is one of the two places that I think could house the most dangerous being of the entire asylum. If you want to have like a sort of like a tyrant from Resident Evil, you could place that thing over here. Or in the experiments storage. I think the experiment storage is more suited, for example, for several powerful enemies. Some experiments of this mad psychiatrist that could start to chase the characters through the entire dungeon. So overall, everything looks great. So what do I think of this Harker Asylum virtual box set? I think this box set is great, especially in its value. You have complete battleground maps. You also have separate tiles. So you're going to have material for campaigns featuring themes of madness, of decay, of hopelessness, and terror. Because you have these tiles that you can modify, remove furniture and doors, and modify the floor, you could print several of these tiles and arrange them in any way that you want on the table. And each time you build a map, it would feel like a completely different building. So this is one of those products that are going to be of use in your entire gaming career. And there are so many games that fit this theme. All of the Cthulhu games, Call of Cthulhu, Realms of Cthulhu, Trails of Cthulhu, some old school Renaissance games such as Silent Legions, some horror games as well, and for example the Accursed from Savage Worlds. For Victoriana is also quite useful. There are so many games that feature insane asylums and creepy buildings. And it's also going to be quite useful if you play some darker skirmish games, such as, for example, Malifaux. If you play the skirmish game or the role-playing game of Malifaux, you could have some interesting matches here. And I like it how the layout for each floor of the asylum is quite different. So if you want like battles that feature a sort of a sense of or flavor of claustrophobia, you should have battles in the dungeon. But if you want a bit more of like an open ground battle, you could use the whole grounds of the asylum, or some of the ground or the first floor, even though there are some more narrow areas. When compared to a dungeon that is really good and portraying or representing that sense of claustrophobia and horror, you have some interesting options no matter what type of game you want to play. So yes, the quality is excellent. The theme is expressed quite perfectly through the colors, through the arrangements of the different rooms, furniture, etc. So I highly recommend that you get the Harker Asylum virtual box set. I hope that you will experience many exciting, creepy, and dangerous adventures using these maps and tiles, and that you create many different buildings using these tiles, rearranging them and playing around with the configuration of the rooms and the corridors. This virtual box set indeed has a great value, and you will use it throughout your entire gaming career. Even if you are a role player or perhaps a war gamer, you will find that this virtual box set contains all of the different scenery elements that you need for your particular battlefield of choice. And remember, I'm going to put the link in the description below so that you can go to the 01 Games website and you can get this virtual box set. Thanks for watching my review. If you have any comments or questions, please let me know. See you later.